Hey everyone, it's Deja from CrochetEverAfter.com. Today we're making this Chevron Infinity cowl scarf. You'll see the pattern link below. The yarn that I use for this is a Blue Sky Alpaca Sport Weight, and I got that from my Knit Crate monthly yarn subscription, so you can read more about that subscription on my blog, but I told everyone that I would make a free pattern from the yarn, and that's what I have here. So download the pattern, grab your yarn and your hook, and we'll get started. Okay, so before I get started, I just wanted to point out that I have 3 cakes of yarn. So I have 2 in the red and 1 in the blue. If you're not going to be using the exact same yarn as I am, because it will say 2 skeins of the red, take whatever yarn you're using, and if it's not 2 skeins, if you only have 1, roll it into 2, and you'll see why once we get going in the pattern. But having 2 of the red color or 2 of whatever color you are choosing instead of the red is going to help you from having to cut your yarn after every single row that you finish. You won't have to cut any yarn as long as you start off with 2 balls, cakes, skeins, whatever it may be that you're using of the yarn in the red or whatever color you're substituting. So with that said, we're going to get started with the pattern. And the first thing we're going to do is put a slip knot on our hook. So I just turn my yarn and I grab my working tail and pull through. I'm using also a bigger hook. This is a 5mm. I don't know if you can, there you can go. It's a 5mm hook. Usually for sport weight you would use probably no larger than a 4, but I want this to be really drapey and really soft, so using a bigger hook is going to give me more drape with it. Now I'm going to chain 34. So I just yarn over from back to front, turn my hook down so it slides easily through my chain, and then push my hook so my loop is on my shaft. And I do that for every single chain so that they are all the same size. And I pull with my other hand that's not making the chains on the chains I've already made to keep them nice and consistent. Okay, I'm almost at 34 chains. Now I've got the width of my cowl scarf. I'm going to start with my row 1 instructions. So it tells me that I'm going to double crochet in the 4th chain from my hook. So those 3 skip chains, you can see the V's, 1, 2, and 3, those are going to count as a double crochet. So I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to insert my hook in just the back loop of the 4th chain. The reason I'm just grabbing the back loop and not trying to make a nice edge with the bottom bump or grabbing 2 loops is because at the very end, when I bring this around to join, I'm going to be sewing it to the other side of my foundation chain. So it does not really matter what the bottom of my foundation chain looks like at the moment. So that's why I'm just picking the back loop. So I've inserted my hook, I'm just going to yarn over and pull up my loop. Then I'm going to yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops. And then yarn over and pull through the second. Now I've got my first double crochet. My pattern now tells me that I'm going to double crochet in the next 3 chains, so 1 double crochet in each of those. So when you're looking for your chains, make sure you're not going into the chain that you just worked. It's going to be quite large when you first start working into it before you start working into the next chain, and that'll kind of even out this one. So go to the chain right to the left of the previous chain. So you yarn over, go through that back loop. You see that I put my finger right behind the chain and kind of helps guide my hook where I need it to go. I'm going to pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through the first 2, yarn over, pull through the second 2. Again, yarn over, through the next chain, pull through the first 2 and pull through the second 2. These are the stitches that are in between the peaks and valleys of my chevron. So I have 3. These first 2 double crochets, the chain 3 and the double crochet, they kind of represent a peak. So my next move is going to be make a valley, and I make a valley by doing DC3 together. So I'm going to double crochet the next 3 chains into 1 double crochet. Okay, so to DC3 together, I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to go into that next chain and pull up a loop, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops. And then I'm going to stop there. Because we're double crocheting 3 together, I'm going to start the beginning of 3 double crochets. So I'm going to yarn over, and now I'm going to go to my next chain. Insert my hook, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops and stop. Then I'm going to do this one more time, yarn over, go into the next chain, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through the first 2 and stop. So now I have 4 loops on my hook, I have the beginning of 3 double crochets, and I'm going to turn them all into 1. So I'm going to yarn over, and to make it easily through all 4 loops, I'm going to turn my hook so it points right down at my work, and it's going to slide nice and easy through all those loops. And you'll see it kind of creates this whole little closed in stitch, and that's going to create the V, the valley of my chevron. So you see when I do my next double crochet in my next chain, I'm going to do 3 more of those, 3 in the next 3 chains, or 1 double crochet in each of the next 3 chains. Let me say it right so I don't confuse you. You'll see how this starts to valley up. We call it peaks and valleys in crochet because that's what they look like, peaks and valleys. Okay, so now I have my valley stitch. You can see it looks like a little V. Now I'm going to make my peak. So I'm going to do that by putting 3 double crochets all at once, or not all at once, but all of them into my next chain. So I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to insert my hook in the next chain, and then I'm going to do another one in that same chain. So now you want to go back into that big hole. So now you can work into that same chain that you just worked into. And then I'm going to put 1 more, so it's nice and large now. And that's going to create a turn that makes a peak. So we're going to do another double crochet, 1 crochet in each of the next 3 chains, so we can get back to our next valley stitch. And that's all we're doing across, is we're doing a valley stitch, then the 3 double crochets in each of, or 1 double crochet in each of the 3 chains, and then a peak stitch. And that's going to be the pattern pretty much for the entire pattern. Let's see how many I did here. I have 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, now we're ready for our DC3 together again. So we're going to insert our hook in the next chain, pull up and pull through the first 2, go to the next chain, pull up, pull through the next 2, next chain, pull up, pull through the next 2. We have those 4 chains on our hook again. So if I didn't turn my hook and I tried to get through these chains, you see it's going to be a little difficult. Turning it straight down kind of goes right in between where those chains are being formed. So it helps them keep from being caught. So now we have our next valley that we just made, so you can see how we're looking here. So we're going to continue that, and you're going to continue that pattern until we get to this very last chain. So keep doing your 3 double crochets, and then your peak, then another valley, and I'll meet you right at that last chain. And just finished my last valley, and I am doing my 3 double crochets. And so normally after our 3 double crochets we would do a peak stitch by doing 3 double crochets in 1, but because this is an end stitch or an end chain, we have 1 chain left after those 3 double crochets, we're going to copy what we did over at this end where we put 2 double crochets. So we're finishing off with just 2 in this last stitch. So you're going to do 1, and then insert your hook back into that chain and do 2. Now before I finish this double crochet, I'm going to stop because I'm going to join in my new ball of red. Now why am I joining in the same exact color? Well, when we get to row 4, you're going to see that we don't have to cut any of our tails because we're working with 3 balls of yarn, even though it's only 2 colors. Because we're working with 3 balls of yarn, you're not going to have to cut any of your tails when you make color changes, which means a lot less weaved in ends. So you gotta trust me on this until we get to row 4 where this will start to make sense. So I'm going to grab my other ball of red and join it in just like as if I was joining in a new color. So I'm at my last step of my last double crochet. I'm going to lay my yarn on my hook and pull through, and then I'm going to turn my work and start row 2. So just drop your tail of your red. These are the only tails you're going to have to weave in besides the ones at the very end, so this is really good. You can just tug on your working tail of your red a little bit if you want to tighten that down, but once you pick it up again on row 4, you'll be set. You won't have to worry about that. So now what we're going to do is row 2. So my first row 2 instruction is to chain 3, which is going to count as a double crochet. And then I'm pretty much just repeating everything that I did in row 1. I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to double crochet in the same stitch that I just did my chain 3. And that's going to make a peak, half a peak stitch on the end. And then I'm going to do 1 double crochet in my next of 3 stitches. So when you're going to pick a stitch, if you're brand new, you can see the hole right there that you can put your hook through, or you can turn your work and look for your V's. So you can see that V right there. We're going to go under both loops of that V. Yarn over, pull up your hook, and just like a normal, pull through the first 2, yarn over, pull through the second 2. Oops. Unless you miss, then you get to go again. Now because this is a chevron, we're copying what we did previously. So you'll see that we have 1, 2, which is where our last valley stitch was, and 3. So we're going to DC these 3 together to make, or to continue our valley stitch. So I pull up a loop, pull through the first 2, yarn over, insert my hook in my next stitch, pull up a loop, pull through the first 2, yarn over, and go through the next. Yarn over, pull through 2, have 4 left, and we're going to pull through all of those. So now you can see how our peaks and valleys are going to line up. So it's going to keep our chevron going. So now we're going to do 1 double crochet in each of the next 3 stitches. And then we're back at our peak. So you should be lining up. If you're not lining up, you probably missed a stitch somewhere, but your peak should be right in the middle of the 3 stitches of your last peak. So you can see this stitch came into this first of my 3 peaks, and now I'm at the middle of my peak. So you can see the 3 stitches right here. So now in this next stitch, I'm going to do 3 double crochets. If you're not lining up, just pull it out and recount your stitches. Because if you do them off-centered a little, you're going to have an off-centered chevron, which might look cool, but if you want the same look as the pattern, you want to make sure you're lining up. Now we're going to do 3 in the next, or 3 double crochets in each. I always say that wrong. 1 double crochet in each of the next 3 stitches. And this is the pattern that you're going to be doing for every single row after. You're going to do your DC3 together when you come to your valley. You're going to do 1 double crochet in each of the next 3 stitches. I said it right that time. After your valley, and then you're going to do peak stitch. So continue on this row, and then right at the end of the row we'll meet up and join our brand new color. Okay, I'm on my last 3 double crochets, and then I'll be at that last chain, which is actually my chain, or last stitch, which is actually my chain 3 from the previous row. So we're going to work in that first chain, and I'm going to go under 2 loops. So insert your hook, and you're going to do 2 double crochets just like last time. 1, and then go right back in that same spot and do another one. Stop though before you finish it, because we're going to join in our new color, so we're just going to leave the red off. Notice that we have 1 red on this side and 1 red on this side, and that's important for not having to cut your yarn, which you're going to see after we finish this row of blue that we're adding in. So I'm going to lay over my hook and pull through those 2 stitches to finish off that last double crochet. Tighten that down just a little bit. Turn my work, drop off the tail of my blue, a little bit longer. And now we're going to do pretty much the same exact, well, it is the exact same instructions for row 2. We're going to chain 3, and then we're going to double crochet in that same stitch, and it's a little bit convoluted with all of our color changes, but if you need to find your stitch, it's that V right there. So just turn it sideways if it's hard to see, and go right under those 2 loops. Do your first double crochet, then 1 double crochet in each of the next 3 stitches. I'm getting better at saying that. Slack here. So the only thing you want to be careful of, because you have these 3 balls, is try to keep them untangled as best you can. Since the tails are pretty much on opposite ends most of the time, it shouldn't be too difficult, but just kind of untangle them as you turn your work when you're starting to work with them. So now we're back at our valley stitch. So you can see 1, 2, and 3. Make sure that your second one is where your valley joined in the last row, so that you're not off in your stitches. I'm going to do another valley, another DC3 together. Oops. Even I get caught sometimes. Then another double crochet in each of my next 3 stitches. Very proud of myself for finally saying that right. Okay, and then we're back at our peak. And I double check as well that I'm at that middle peak stitch, so I know I didn't miss anything, especially while talking. So we're going to keep doing that, and then at the end of this row you're going to see why we are doing 2 balls of red. You're going to see the magic of not having to cut your yarn. So keep on going until you get to that very last stitch of the row, and we'll join up our red. Okay, again, I'm at the last 3 DCs again. And this is where the greatness of not having to cut yarn comes in handy. It's also a great thing because you don't, if you maybe didn't like your color choices and you wanted to pull it out, you don't have cut ends. You can pull out a whole ball of yarn, or if you needed to fix something because you're not cutting your ends, you can easily rewind your balls if you have to. So I'm at the very last stitch. So I'm going to, remember I have to do 2 double crochets in my last stitch. So the reason why I go through under 2 loops when I get to these chains, because these are all going to be chain 3 stitches, is So if I just grab one loop, you'll see that it pulls my chains out of shape, and I get this big loop here. So I don't like the look of that, even though I'm putting an edging on this so it'll be covered. I like to just keep with my tradition of putting it under 2 loops, and it makes my loop a lot smaller. So that's my first double crochet, and then I'm going to do one more in that same spot, but I'm going to stop at my last step as I need to join in my red. So make sure you're grabbing the actual working yarn because you have a couple tails over here. So here's my working yarn. All I'm going to do is run it right up the side of my work, and I'm going to pull and start my red, and I'm going to drop off my blue. So remember, when we get to the end of this row, we have that red over here to join up. So every single row, when we come to it, we have a tail to join in. Now, we're putting an edging on this, so you won't see these tails that are running up along the side. If you didn't want to put an edging on it, you'd have to kind of hide them in your stitches as you go. It's possible, but I'm not going to show that on this tutorial, but if you really want to see it, just leave me a request and I'll make one where it's hiding the tails. But because we're putting an edging on this, I don't want to waste your time with that at the moment. So make sure when you're pulling this tail up to join your color that you are keeping it slack enough, because if you tighten it down, you're going to make a little divot or fold in your project. So make sure you have enough slack that when you start crocheting with it, it's not going to pull on your project. So as usual, 3 chains and a double crochet in that same stitch. Then we're just going to keep doing that same stuff across. 3 double crochets, valley, 3 double crochets, peak. So keep going, and then I'll show you, I'll join up the red again at the other end so you can be sure that you're comfortable with that. Alright, I'm almost at my last stitch, so I can join my next ball of red in. I'm doing my first of 2. Oops. And then my second of 2. So again, I stop at that last stitch. I grab my red. Now the reason why I don't do 1 ball of red is because my tail would be on the opposite side of where my blue is. So you can see my blue is here. If I was to do, let's see if I can explain this easier. If I was to finish off my red where I join my blue tail would be over here. Then if I did 1 ball of red, I would come across, my tail would be here, then I would come back across, and my blue tail would be over here instead of over here. So I have to do 3 colors or 3 balls to be able to run my colors up along the side. So if you're going to do a chevron, whatever colors you may be, if you don't want to have to cut the ends, do 3 colors or 3 balls of yarn and run the tails along the edge. If you try to, you'll see that it does not work. So you'll see that I just ran at my red, I dropped my old red, and then I'm just starting my next row. And I'm having trouble finding that first stitch. Here we go. With lots of different tails coming in and out of here, make sure if you're having trouble finding where to put your first hook, because you can see I have all these little tails running everywhere, just turn your work sideways, find that first V, and go just under those 2 loops, and you'll always catch the right stitch. So now you'll see when we get back over, our blue tail is in the right spot for us. So we'll do that one more time, and then you're going to be on your own for finishing off this project till we get to where we're going to put in edging on it and join it and all that good stuff. Alright, almost at the very last stitch here, so I can join my blue back in. So as you're working this pattern, if you have any trouble, when you pull out your yarn, you're not going to have to knot or cut anything. It should all come freely out because of the way that this is made. So now I'm running my blue up the side, yarning over and pulling it through, nice and loose. Now I'm going to turn my work and start with the blue. Just drop off your red. So keep on going in this fashion, and then when we get to the end of it, the chevrons, I'll show you how to join them up and put an edging on it. Alright, I am just on my last double crochet of my last row, which is row 81, and you'll see that I haven't fastened off my reds yet. I am leaving those on, and I'll explain that in just a second, but I am going to fasten off my blue. But I'm going to make a really long tail, so how I usually fasten off is do a chain, and then I pull it the length that I want to cut it. I want it to be about double the width of my row, because I'm going to use that tail to whip stitch my cowl scarf together. So I'm just going to pull it nice and long so it's easy to sew with. Then I'm going to cut it and then take my blue and pull it out. Okay, so I'm just going to fold my scarf in half so that I can easily sew it up. You can only see the ends because it's a pretty big scarf cowl. And I'm just going to kind of keep my reds that I still have attached out of the way. I just rolled them into little balls to be easier to deal with. I'm going to keep those out of the way. And I'm going to thread my blue. I'm just going to do a simple whip stitch. You can do a mattress stitch. I wouldn't really recommend a single crochet. I think the whip stitch will be just fine to join this. So what you want to do is make sure that you have the side that you want facing out. So if there is a side that you like better facing out, fold that in. So you're going to put your right sides together. So I'm just going to stick with what I have right here, and I'm going to call those my right sides, because we're going to whip stitch the opposite way. So when we open up, we'll have any kind of seam that this is going to leave, which it doesn't really leave a seam, but just if there's anything visible, it'll be hidden inside the cowl. Now you see that my edges are opposite, but when we whip stitch them together, they're going to meet up. So just keep, because you have the same amount of stitches on both edges, you just need to keep your stitches lined up and do the same amount of whip stitching. So my original foundation chain edge is a little bit more difficult to see because it doesn't have the V's of my ending row. So you need to just take a little extra time, but if you kind of pull on it, you can see those little holes. You can see where each little loop goes through. So that's what we're going to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go straight over my work, and I'm going to come in the back side of that first stitch on row 1, or technically foundation chain. And then I'm going to go through the very last stitch of my row. This is my fasten off, so I don't want to put it through that little chain. I pull that tight. But I want to go through that very last stitch, which is that V, to start off. So just like if you're going to do a stitch, just go under those first 2 loops. You can also just go under 1 loop, totally up to you. I'm just going to go under both to make it easy. Then I'm going to go back over, and again I'm going to come through the back side of the next stitch. So I want to make sure, so I almost went through the same stitch, so you want to pull on it and look for your next stitch. So here is my next stitch, and then I'm going to go into the next stitch on this side. And it's going to go over the top, so you see how it winds itself around. And just pull it through. You don't have to tighten it all the way down just yet, because you can pull on it to find your stitches a little bit easier when it's looser. But I'm just going to keep going back over the top. Try not to get yourself tangled so that it will stay as clean as possible. And then I go back over, so that's where, and when it's loose you can see where your last stitch was. So I can see that one's there, so I'm going to go to this one. And I'm going under both loops. Remember, I only went in my back loop when I did my very first row, and I have the front loop and the bottom bump left over. I'm just going through both of them, just like I'm going through both loops of this stitch. That's my preference for this project, but you don't have to. You can go through just one loop here and one loop here. It's not going to make too big of a difference on your final look. You can check out my whip stitch joining video, and I believe I show you different what the edges look like depending on if you go through one loop or both loops. So I'm just going to keep going all the way across to join up my scarf cowl. And because I'm going to be very careful, it's going to take just a little bit of time, but I wanted to show you when I get to this V how that joins up. So when I open it up, you'll see that it's all joined up right there. So even though they're not matching up when I'm folding them in half, once I open it up, it's going to join up. And I haven't even tightened this down yet. Once I tighten it down, it's going to create almost an invisible seam. So keep on going across with this join and take your time so that you line up your stitches perfectly so that you don't have any gaps or holes or, like when you button a shirt with the wrong button and everything's, crooked. Make sure you take the time to get every single stitch. And then we'll meet up right at the end, and then we'll put our border on this. Okay, I finished whip stitching and I'm just pulling on the last bit of my edge. With natural fiber, you kind of want to tighten it as you go because they have a tendency, the yarn, to kind of stick to itself because they're shorter hairs. So as you're doing your whip stitch, maybe every 8 or so stitches, pull on it a little bit. So you can see now this is where I did my join, right up here. And if you look at my other rows, it's pretty much well hidden. It's almost a invisible seam. When you flip it to the front, you can see that it blends in really well. If I didn't tell you which row it was, then you probably wouldn't even know that I had done my seam here. And it's really flat, so there's no three-dimensional bump to this stitch. I'm trying to see if you can see that at all, but it's completely flat in line with the rest of the scarf. So when you put it on, you don't have to worry about moving, the part that has the seam to the back, because it shouldn't really show up. I have all these tails that I need to weave in, but before I do that, I'm going to work on my border. So I'm going to flip my cowl scarf right side out, and then I'm going to go where my yarn is already joined up, because I have one red on one side and I have another red on the other side. So I have the perfect setup to do both sides of my border. So you can see all my tails that are running along the side. I'm going to cover all those up while I do my border. Let me find the end of this ball here. And I'm real big at not having to weave in a whole lot of ends. So we're just going to start right from where we left off with this tail. So let me grab my hook and we'll start making that border. Okay, so here is where I joined up my scarf, my tail, and this is my leftover red that I dropped and didn't fasten off at the end, and we're just going to pick up right from here. You can see that it's kind of joined to the bottom of this row. Now when I'm doing my border, it's just going to be a simple single crochet border. There are two things that I want to do. One, I want to encase all of these tails that I have running down my edges, and you'll see they're a little bit slack, and that's so that when I stretch my cowl, it has lots of room to stretch. It doesn't get stuck. And then the second thing I want to do is I want to put I want to put 2 single crochets for every row of double crochet. So to start this off, all we're going to do is yarn over, just wrap your yarn around your hook from back to front and insert your hook into that next stitch. And you'll see that there's kind of almost like a double looking V-stitch, even though it's the side of our double crochet. So I'm just going to insert it under the 2 loops that I see, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop. And look, I already have what I can do for a single crochet. I just have to yarn over and pull through. And this is the single crochet that I'm going to join up once I go all the way around. So for my next one, I'm just going to go under this whole loop here. Make it nice and easy. This next one is my blue, so I'm going to put 2 in there. And you notice that I'm not even really paying attention to these loops because they fall, or the tails, they fall right in line with my single crochets. I don't have to think too much about them, about crocheting them in, because they are right there on top. But make sure that you're joining them through. So here I have 2 rows of red, so I'm going to have 4 single crochets all together. I like going into this little hole right here for the first one. So I go in, yarn over, and you see it catches that tail and covers it up. And I'm not crocheting really tight. I'm going to do kind of a loose crochet so that it can stretch as well, so that I don't have a super tight border. So that's all I'm going to do all the way around my entire cowl. So I'm just going to keep going all the way around, and then when we get over to the edge, I'm going to stop and show you how to join it up. So just single crochet all the way around one side, and I'll meet you at the end of it. Okay, I'm all the way around my border, and I'm right where I did my joining of my scarf cowl. So I want to pull that tight just so I can make sure I'm getting the right spot when I am doing my next 2. So I'm just going to single crochet. Oops. I'm going to leave my tails out so I can weave those in better. And the single crochet around those 2. And then remember that first single crochet was down here, so we still have this row of red that we need to single crochet around. So do 2 more around here, and then we're back at that very first single crochet we made. So we're going to go ahead and just go under both loops and slip stitch to join it. Then you can go ahead and fasten off. And I was pretty close, that's how much yarn I had left on this side. But I'm still going to cut it a little bit shorter because that's a little too long to weave in. So now I have one side done, and I just have to do my other side. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. I have my tail still attached, so I'm just going to flip my cowl around so that I'm working in the correct direction. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, go all the way around, and then we'll be finished with the cowl. Alright, I've finished doing the border on both sides of my scarf cowl, and I just have to weave in all of my ends now. So that's going to take a little bit of time because there's quite a few, but not as many as if we would have had to cut each row. So that's a very nice plus. And you can see that the border has pretty well hidden all of our tails that we had running along. So I'm going to weave in the ends, and then we are going to be done with the scarf cowl.